you head out onto the water with your stand-up paddleboard, it's really important you plan your paddle to help ensure you and your paddling buddies have a fun and safe SUP session. Make sure you consider the following: the wind and the weather, your location, the tide or the river conditions, appropriate clothing, your personal flotation, communication and emergency, your equipment, and the correct leash. In this video, I'm going to be talking about tides, giving you a basic understanding of tides and how to find out about them, explaining what effects the tides might have on your paddling, and what you can do to help stay safe when paddling in tidal areas. There's a lot to consider with regarding tides, more than whether it's just in or out. Having some tidal knowledge will help you avoid paddling in strong flowing tides, which can be challenging and very dangerous. Tidal waters will include the sea, estuaries, creeks, harbours, marine lakes, or tidal rivers. So to start off with, what are tides? The water on Earth is constantly moving due to the gravity of the moon and the sun. On large bodies of water, the sea, this results in tides. Every 6 hours or so, the water moves from a high to a low tide, therefore having 2 high tides and 2 low tides each day. For example, low tide could be at 6 AM and the tide is coming in through to high tide roughly at 12 PM. There are some exceptions to this in very localized areas, so it's always worth seeking local knowledge. Tides vary from day to day and are different between locations, not only in their times but also their heights. When the tides are big, i.e. high and low lows, resulting in lots of water movement, these are known as spring tides. When the tides are smaller, as in low highs and high lows, resulting in less water movement, these are known as neap tides. This tidal information can be found in annual tide papers, books, on the internet, local water sports shops, and there's also several apps available on tides as well. It's important you look at tidal information for as close to your paddle location as you can to ensure it's accurate. Check not only the high tide and the low tide times, but also the heights as well. There's lots you can learn about tides, but even just having a basic understanding can make all the difference to your paddling experience and help keep you safe when afloat. So how do tides affect your paddling? The tide, however big or small, will certainly have an impact on your paddling, not just determining whether the water is there when you go paddling and how far you have to walk across the beach to get to the water, but also moving tides mean moving water, and that moving water will make it easier or harder to paddle depending on which way it's flowing. In estuaries and creeks, as the tide comes in, the water will move up into the estuary or creek. As the tide goes out, the water flows back towards the sea. On the coast, the tide is visible where the water is moving up and down the beach. But tides don't just move in and out from the shore, they move along the coastline. And the direction and the speed the water moves varies greatly according to the location. Whether paddling in an estuary or along the coast, paddling into the flow of the tide can be challenging or even impossible to paddle against, leaving you in a very dangerous situation if you're unable to get back. Even if the water looks flat and very enticing, there can still be a strong flow when paddling on tidal waters. So it's vitally important you consider the state of the tide and the direction the water is flowing so you know how it will impact your paddling. Some locations you can only paddle at particular tide states, like tidal estuaries, which might be dry mud and sand when it's low tide, so definitely seek local knowledge and check your tide times for that. It's also worth bearing in mind the tide doesn't flow at the same speed through its cycle. It's slowest at the 1st and 2nd hour and the 5th and 6th hour, and it's fastest in the 3rd and 4th hour in the middle of the tide. If paddling in a strong tidal area, either avoid the times where the water is flowing the fastest, mid-tide, or plan to utilize the tide by paddling in the direction the water is moving. For example, up the estuary until high tide, and then turn around and paddle back down the estuary on the dropping tide. This will mean you never have to be paddling and battling against the tide. If you're having to paddle against the tide at any point, paddling as close to the estuary bank as possible will allow you to escape the main flow. And you can still make good progress even with a strong current. When paddling across the tidal flow, such as when you're paddling across an estuary, bear in mind that you are unlikely to be able to paddle straight across the tide, and it's almost likely to push you down the direction it's flowing. So take this into account before you cross. Start further up the river if necessary to ensure you reach your desired finish point. Make sure you consider the tide for the duration of your paddle to ensure there's not only enough water to launch and land, but also to safely paddle in the water flow. The size and the time of the tide and the speed of the moving water can have a huge effect on the paddling conditions. A location that's easy to paddle in the morning at high tide can be extremely challenging and unsafe to paddle just a few hours later at mid-tide when the tide is flowing its fastest, especially on a spring tide. So what are the risks when paddling on tidal waters and how to stay safe? As well as the effects tidal waters have on your general paddling, there's also some more hidden risks you need to be aware of, such as the risk of the water flow pushing you or your board towards obstruction, such as a buoy or a boat fixed to the seabed, which can easily result in you becoming pinned against them or your leash becoming caught around them. So it's important you not only stay aware at all times of potential hazards around you when paddling on tidal waters, but also that you have the correct equipment to help stay safe. When paddling on tidal waters, it's recommended you wear a coiled leash with a waist quick release. Using a coiled leash ensures it keeps it out of the water, reducing the chances of it getting entangled. And a waist quick release allows you to quickly and easily detach yourself from your board in the case of an emergency. Ankle leashes can be difficult to reach and unfasten when in flowing water, making them more of a hazard than a help, so not recommended. It's also advised you wear a personal flotation device when paddling on tidal waters, such as a buoyancy aid or a manually inflated PFD. Compact waist PFDs are unrestricted and are a great option, but it's worth remembering that they do require activation and they do not provide you with immediate buoyancy. To find out more about different leashes and PFD options, check out our separate leash and PFD videos. There's more to consider than you think. Before paddling on any tidal waters, make sure you know what the tide is doing on the day at your chosen location and how it's likely to impact your paddle. Use your tide knowledge as well as the wind and weather knowledge to help plan your paddle. And make sure you wear a PFD and a quick release leash. Remember, just because a tidal location is okay and safe to paddle on one day, it doesn't necessarily mean it will be the next. Always reassess the paddling conditions by considering the tide on the day and the time you plan to paddle. I hope you found this video informative and useful. Hopefully this video has given you more to think about when you paddle in tides and how they might impact your paddling and making sure you stay as safe as possible when you're paddling in tidal waters. Please share this information with other stand-up paddleboarders to help keep everyone SUP safe out on the water.